if you can all make yourselves comfortable and settle in. His and Her Excellencies, Prime Ministers and Ministers of Represented Countries, Ambassadors and Excellencies of Represented Countries, Directors, Delegation Leaders and Heads of Represented Countries, distinguished guests, invited guests, members of the press, and ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and welcome to this high-level Political Forum side event on taking early action to leave no one behind, specifically delivering for the world's poorest people. My name is Michelle Brooks, and I am delighted to serve as your moderator this afternoon. I join you from the beautiful country of Aruba, our small island nation, where we too have committed to leaving no one behind. This side event this afternoon is co-hosted by the Netherlands, Kenya, and the Overseas Development Institute, better known as ODI. This afternoon, as you can see, our format's going to be a little bit different. We're thrilled to see that so many of you have accepted the invitation to join us this afternoon, and we will do our best to inspire you to leave no one behind. As you can see to my left, we do have our artist, Derek, and he is going to be painting our commitment tree as we go through the course of this session this afternoon. And so as commitments are made to taking early action and leaving no one behind, those commitments will be drawn on the commitment tree. And so everyone that will speak this afternoon will also have an opportunity to sign the commitment tree. Thank you, Derek. Also, if you will note, it's at the bottom of our canvas, but also up on the screen is our Twitter tag name. It's HLPF 2016, hashtag LNOB Early Action. So for those of you who are on Twitter, we ask that you please go ahead and tweet during the course of this presentation. Our commitment tree represents the high-level fruit of Leave No One Behind action to symbolize that the time has come to go beyond picking low-hanging fruit, but to make the commitment from high for high-hanging fruit. Our desired outcome for today's event is to mobilize commitments from countries and international organizations for early action to leave no one behind. And who better to inspire us and open our program today? But ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of Norway and the co-chair of the UN Secretary General's SDG Advocacy Group, Mrs. Erna Solberg.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first I would like to thank the Netherlands, Kenya, the Overseas Development Institute and Civicus for making this important meeting happening. The pledge to leave no one behind is the guiding star of the SDG era. It's like putting the high jump bar up to a world record height. We put the bar that high to help us to see what massive task we have set ourselves and ensure that we can mobilize resources accordingly. And why is this pledge so important? Nelson Mandela has put it best, and I'd like to quote him: "As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality exist in our world, none of us can truly rest." Eradicating extreme poverty, ensuring mothers and children do not die from avoidable complications during birth, making sure that everyone is nourished and gets a quality education is our common responsibility. To leave no one behind is the right motto for our efforts. It's also a smart motto. I see the 17 SDGs as a roadmap for fixing what is broken in our globalized and interdependent world. If we are to achieve lasting peace, stop forced migration, fight pandemics, and pandemics and ensure environmental sustainability anywhere in the world, our common SDG effort must apply everywhere in the world. And since we are smart and determined to do what is right, we will not leave fragile and marginalized areas and populations behind. Like a champion high jumper training for a world record attempt, we have to approach our goal in a systematic and holistic way. We know from the MDG campaign that reaching the most marginalized is maybe the most difficult. This is mainly due to problems of access and of high costs. It's often hard to reach people trapped in areas of crisis and conflict for obvious reasons of safety. And it's costly because a good deal of infrastructure has to be built from scratch in the poorest and most marginalized areas of the world. This means that people living in these areas fall behind on virtually all the development taking place elsewhere in the world, and they do not enjoy the most basic rights. However, this should be taken as a challenge, not a discouragement. If it takes preventing and stopping wars, if it takes building basic infrastructure from scratch to reach the most vulnerable, marginalized and destitute, we are going to do it. We are going to do it for our common good, regardless of where we live and how we live. Education and health are two key factors for success. And let me offer a few examples of what my own country is involved in when it comes to these sectors. When my government took office almost 3 years ago, we put education first in Norway's development policy. We are doubling development aid for education over a 4-year period. In 2016, we will invest more than $340 million in global education. Girls' education and education in emergencies and crisis are given particular attention. 37 million children and adolescents are out of school due to crisis and conflicts. So far, the international community has done too little, too late out in the field. It is also crucial to find better ways of bridging humanitarian and development aid. Children and young people who are not in school are in a higher risk of exploitation. Girls have a greater risk of child marriage, sex slavery, or boys of becoming child soldiers. Norway has played an active role in developing Education Cannot Wait Fund for education in emergencies. Together with Argentina, Norway has also played a leading role in establishing the Safe Schools Declaration, which protects schools and universities from military use during armed conflicts. This declaration was adopted in May 2015 and has been endorsed by 54 states. And I'd like to use this opportunity to encourage all states to join the declaration. At the same time, the downward trend in financing education must be reversed to ensure that no one is left behind. Last summer, I initiated an international commission on financing global education opportunities. The Commission's report will be presented to the UN Secretary General in September. My hope is that this report will mobilize additional political will and financial resources for education. If you're turning to our global health efforts, Norway invested in 2016 the amount of $265 million. Our two main funding channels are Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Both initiatives are increasing their efforts and resources to help the hardest to reach. As you continue to this important meeting, I'll encourage you to do what record breakers do, to keep focus on the goal, not on the obstacles. If you do that, we can, together, achieve a breakthrough in sustainable development and leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Norway has set an excellent example and has definitely set the bar high for the other countries to follow. So we would like to once more thank Prime Minister of Norway, Mrs. Erna Solberg, for being with us this afternoon and for delivering these opening remarks. Thank you, Prime Minister. And now I have the pleasure of welcoming two of our co-hosts to the front to join me. We have the Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation to the Netherlands, Mrs. Liliane Ploumen. Thank you. And we also are excited to have the Cabinet Secretary for Devolution and Planning for the country of Kenya with us this afternoon, Mr. Mwangi Kiunjuri. Okay, so this is where things change up a little bit. This may be outside of what you are accustomed to seeing at a side event, but I wanted to feel like Oprah today, and hopefully I do her justice this afternoon. But what we've decided to do is to allow our speakers this afternoon the opportunity to speak in a more comfortable setting, in a more comfortable environment, about the early action steps that many of them have already taken to leaving no one behind. And so what I would like to do now is I'm going to sit also, and I am going to pose some questions and to both of you, but I'm going to start with Minister Ploumen. And so, Minister Ploumen, why has the Netherlands and Kenya embraced this initiative with such vigor?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for joining us. Special thanks to the Prime Minister of Norway, who made a very strong plea that I think Kenya and the Netherlands can certainly underline. The SDGs are a very powerful agenda, but we need to take it upon ourselves immediately to step up to action. The goal is in 2030, but if we just wait till 2030, we will not get there. So, speaking for ourselves, and my colleague will probably join me, speaking for the Netherlands, we thought it was very important to focus on leaving no one behind as soon as possible, because people who are left behind because they have no voice. We tend not to hear them, and so we also tend to overlook them, and that is why we call for this very early action to start immediately after we adopted the agenda.
Okay, very good. And what I'm going to do now, actually, is I'm going to ask this young man here, if you can grab that other microphone for me, because this way it'll just facilitate things a little bit better. Yes. And if you can just give that to the Minister Ploumen. Yes, make sure it's on. Yes, it is. Okay, good. All right,
well,
thank you. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, Minister Ploumen. And it is true, we do need to, a lot of times we procrastinate, right, on making important decisions. And 2030 is far away, and so a lot of folks may ask the question, why the push, right, for early action? But what is your view on Leave No One Behind?
Yeah, well, I mean, one could speak for hours on the issue, but let me be very brief and say it in very simple words, no jargon, etc. I always try to think, how would I feel if I would be overlooked by everybody? With my own government, maybe my own parents because I'm a girl, maybe by the rest of the world. And if I would be that person, I would like to speak up for myself, but I would like to have some help. And this is where I think all of us come in, not only governments, but also private sector, community organizations. And I think everyone has a right to be who she wants to be, and everyone has the right to use her talents. And this is not the case right now. And this grave injustice is, I think, is at an individual level making people very frustrated. But also when you look at the way that the world works these days, we see what happens when people are angry and frustrated and when they feel that their voice is never heard. they refer to other actions. And I think, again, we need to do justice to every human being, and we need to really address issues of inequality by giving everyone a voice.
Yes, yes, I've got to applause to that one. Absolutely. So, why is Leave No One Behind so important, Minister Plowman, and what does it mean for your country, the Netherlands?
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, the Netherlands is one of the most affluent countries in the world, with a 17th economy. So basically, one could say we're in good shape. But the 2030 agenda is a universal agenda, and you cannot only point to others, you also have to point to yourself and look what you need to do. And one of the goals where the Netherlands, and you wouldn't believe this, but it is true, is lagging behind is women in leadership positions. We never had a female PM. We have only maybe 10 to 15% of our businesses are led by women. We do have strong women participation in our cabinet, but we see that at many, many levels, women are underrepresented. And this is, of course, because of the glass ceiling, but also because of the sticky floor. But we feel as a government that we need to really step up our efforts and work in our own country on that issue. So there is a national agenda, and obviously there's also an international agenda where I feel that inequality is the mother of all crises, be it environmental, political, and so I feel that we really need to focus part of our commitments to leaving no one behind, investing in people who have no voice, who are marginalized, pastoralist people, women and girls in some positions, people who are disabled. All these groups need to have a podium and a platform, and this is why I think the Netherlands needs to step up its efforts.
Thank you. Yes, excellent. Thank you, Minister Plowman. And now I want to give an opportunity for Cabinet Secretary Kinjuri, yes, to talk a little bit about his country, Kenya, and what efforts are being made in your country to address Leave No One Behind. Have there been any early actions taken already?
Thank you very much. And on the onset, first I thank the Prime Minister again from Norway and all of us present. And I take this opportunity not only as Kenya but to represent Africa, for our problems are really common. Kenya is really committed, and already it's a requirement in the Constitution. We set in a new Constitution, 2010, and the Constitution itself has committed the leadership of the country towards the achievement that no one will be left behind when it comes to the issues that leads to human rights. And specifically, we have articles that are very specific on the question of human rights. Already, if you look at the country, when it comes to issues, for example, free primary education, it's already being achieved. Kenya is implementing it. On the issue of health resilience, again, if you look at it, we already have targeted some areas like tuberculosis and other diseases, communicable diseases that are supposed to be addressed to this level. Kenya is really advancing. But to say the least is that we took the Millennium Development Goals seriously. And when now it came to SDGs, we are in the forefront. Much as Kenya was not giving any presentation during this high-level political forum, I believe we look at when we benchmark ourselves, a lot is done. And when we come next year for the same forum, you realize that we are very much ahead. On issues of concerning infrastructure, already we are one of the fastest growing in terms of electrification, both rural. It's a case study. We are doing it from 20% 3 years ago to 53%. It is remarkable. Kenya is already a medium term income and that shows the level of commitment to the government of Kenya. When it comes to the issue of gender, again, we are really advanced. It's a constitutional requirement, and that's one of the issues that still remains a good example to the whole of Africa and the world as a whole. On gender, Parliament is properly represented. It's true that women is already attained in the country. All political efforts to that gender parity is already achieved. Youth at the same time. You come to a procurement, you come to finance and issues of procurement. Already the government has set aside 30% for both women and youth. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics is also being taken into consideration and is able to map out areas where now actual pointing down to the grassroots, the common man, trying to identify areas that will be of our priority when it comes to identification of the highly marginalized and those not to be left behind.
Yes. Secretary Kanjuri, you and your country should be applauded for taking the commitment to the highest level and constitutionalizing it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, deserves an applause. To hear that in Africa, in the country of Kenya, that so many strides has already been taken, and to hear of the planning for future commitments to be executed is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And we just thank you for co-hosting this event this afternoon. Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing. But please stay on the sofa because we are going to invite a couple more individuals forward so that they can also join us. Okay? Thank you. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to call forward two individuals who are very, very passionate and excited on this subject. And so I'd like to call forward now the Secretary General for Civicus, Mr. He's known as Danny. I'm going to try to pronounce the name, right? Mr. Dhananjay Srisandaraja.
Good enough.
Good enough. This is good. Okay, welcome, Danny. And then also from ODI, the Overseas Development Institute. She's a woman that I have grown to admire over the last couple of weeks. But she's the head of program at ODI, Mrs. Elizabeth Stewart. Please welcome her. Okay, and so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to give Danny an opportunity to talk a little bit about Civicus and the work that they've been doing. So Danny, I read a quote in an article, and it said, civil society has worked hard to get diverse perspectives included in the draft goals for the 2030 agenda. But now we must focus attention on holding governments to account for the commitments they make. Right? So Kenya has already said that they have made that commitment at the highest level. So we don't have to hold them accountable. But maybe there are a few others in the room. And so how does Civicus plan on accomplishing this?
Okay, great. I was worried when you said I got something that you said recently. I said all sorts of random things, most of which are contradictory. But I think what we need to recognize is the process to get to the Sustainable Development Goals were really open and inclusive in a way that was unprecedented, and we have to give ourselves collective credit for that. But the journey can't stop there. It's not, we can't afford to say this is just an agenda that was agreed by some governments in New York and that will live only in governments, because we have to make sure that this agenda is owned by every person on the planet who feels that this is their vision of a just and sustainable world. And importantly for Civicus, which is a global alliance of civil society which are members in 175 countries, our challenge is to get more of our members excited by this agenda. Because if we take the high jump analogy, we could have set the bar high, and we could all, people in this room, including civil society folk here, be asking for some serious trouble in the future because we may not make this bar that we claim that we've set. And we all risk looking incredibly embarrassed in years to come if we don't make sufficient progress. And in fact, I don't mind that. I'd rather set a bar high and work extra hard, especially early on, to get there, But I think that those of us in civil society who come to meetings like this are just as responsible for making sure that this agenda is achieved, and that's why it's really important. And of course, the leave no one behind phrase, when I talk to our members in civil society around the world, is perhaps the easiest phrase to communicate this language. Very complicated and sophisticated, broad agreement, because it has the potential to engage everyone. Because you could be a children's rights activist or a gender equality activist who knows nothing about the UN agenda, but the Leave No One Behind agenda speaks to what you are interested in and passionate about, and connects what you do at the local level to a global agenda.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much, Danny. Thank you. And Elizabeth, you have actually done a whole lot of research on the subject of early action and leave no one behind. And I believe you have some facts that you would like to share with us this afternoon. Yes?
That's right.
Okay, I'll invite you to the lectern if you're more comfortable with that.
Do you want me to stand? Okay, I'm going to stand over here. Now for the science part. As they say now, but have you got a clicker? So I'm going to, first of all, I'm delighted that there's so much energy and enthusiasm and engagement in the room for this issue. It's really wonderful, fantastic to see. Second of all, I'm going to show you some new evidence, some new analysis from ODI on exactly why we say action needs to start early. This is the kind of, we've looked at the numbers on this, and I'm going to talk you through it. And particularly interesting, I think, is the cost of delaying action. I'm just going to click through these. We've just launched a report that sets out this agenda in its entirety. It's a little bit like a pension, if you like. So the longer you leave paying into a pension, the more expensive it gets, the harder it gets to put enough money in that pension, because the time to deliver the outcome you want is squeezed. And leaving no one behind and the SDGs work exactly the same way. So we've looked at a few of the different leave no one behind SDG goal areas, and as I say, we've calculated the cost of delaying action. So the first one I'm going to show you is ultra poverty. That's a real minimum standard. That's people living on just $1 a day. That's really the minimum survival level for people. So this is looking at sub-Saharan Africa, which is the region that's furthest behind on alleviating ultra poverty. At the moment, sub-Saharan Africa in general is making progress at a rate of around 5%. It's lifting people out of poverty, ultra poverty, around 5% a year. To reach leave no one behind by 2030, if governments start right now, that rate needs to double to 10%. But you see, if they leave it just 3 years to 2018, that goes up to 13%. Leave it 6 years and current effort needs to treble. That's pretty much impossible, I can tell you. It's a similar picture for child mortality, under 5 mortality. You can read the numbers, and it's a similar picture for education poverty. That's children being in school for less than 4 years. Let's really not wait till it gets to be 55% effort needed a year. I think we can see that's a complete disaster. So that's the scale of the challenge. But our analysis has also shown that this is something that can be achieved. We can't achieve the whole leave no one behind agenda in 3 years, of course, but there's a significant down payment that can be made in 3 years. And actually, I've been amazed at looking at what countries at different levels of development have been able to achieve at scale on issues, on policies that will lift poor and marginalised people out of the condition of immiseration in just a 3-year timescale. This is, if that's the challenge, this shows you what's possible. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. So one is in Ethiopia. In just over 3 years, they got 7.5 million people in the social protection program. So that's kind of people, really poor people being lifted out of poverty. 7.5 million people in just over 3 years. I think that's extraordinary. That's showing this can be done at scale. I'll give you an example from outside of Africa, Vietnam. In just 3 years, so the government introduced a policy specially targeted at ethnic minority children. In 3 years, 16% of children in preschool were from ethnic minorities, so they were actually overrepresented in preschool. Again, I think that's an extraordinary achievement. So just quickly to close on what our analysis shows needs to happen now. So Governments need to quickly develop a Leave No One Behind strategy and start implementing it in the first 1,000 days. That's the first 3 years of the SDGs. And I would suggest actually that at the end of that time, what we need is another kind of high-level check-in moment to see what progress has been achieved, to make sure we don't leave no one behind. And maybe it's another high-level summit in New York in 2018, maybe it's something different, but I think we need to make sure that we're checking progress, we're course-correcting, and we're learning from each other if we're going to leave no one behind and do it quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those facts with us. Yes, you can take a seat. We wanted to make sure and include this. ODI conducted this research headed up by Elizabeth, but we wanted to make sure and share this with those of you in the room who need to be able to go back home and I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. So there are, what Elizabeth's telling me is that there are copies of the entire report in the back, because obviously, in the interest of time, she was unable to share all the facts, all of what the research uncovered. So please make sure that you do take a copy with you before you leave today. But it's very important that we share these facts so that everyone understands why it is important for us to take early action and why we should start now, so that in the next 3 years we can actually realize some really good results, right? And so I want to now revert back to Minister Pullman and Secretary Kinjuri. But now that you have heard this evidence that's been shared by ODI, you've heard briefly from Danny about Civicus and what their commitment's going to be. What do you think about that? What is this research speak to you?
I think the most important thing and what should come out clearly when it comes to the issue of no one is left behind is first is that the commitment. The countries must commit themselves first because they have to commit. For example, Kenya is committing itself because it must commit. Because without doing so, the countries will still be left behind. They will not be able to be competitive. They will not be able to go global. And therefore, they will have no choice. And two is that as they move behind, other issues must be taken into consideration. We ask ourselves, are we on the same footing? So that as we address this question, we look at countries. Already I've looked at the program. It is true. There are countries that are more poorer than the others. There are countries that are willing but they cannot move. Of course, you can have the will, but you cannot be able to move.
Yes.
And those are issues that will be very fundamental to us.
Yes.
Again, we need to at least gauge, depending on the state of the country. For example, I've seen Ethiopia put on 7.5 million to social support. Kenya has put in hunger safety social support to about 2.5 million. But if you look at the population of Kenya, population of Ethiopia, again, you can gauge on how far we are going. Two, you look at the poverty index of the country, and therefore it's a lot. This debate, we must address so many of those issues. And lastly, I think we should first of all start by identifying the problem. We go to the grassroots first. Are countries able even to map up who is poor, who is not poor?
Yes.
Some of the countries have no capacity.
Yes.
And as a country, Kenya, we already have a challenge.
Yeah. Secretary Kinjuri, I'm so sorry, but we're pressed for time, so I need you to wrap up so that I can get to Minister Flumen. Sorry.
Thank you. So my conclusion is that the best way is to ensure that what we commit to is what comes clearly and can be acceptable.
Yes.
That can be achieved by our countries.
Yes, and I will agree with that, because one of the things I think for the average layman is all of this is great, but when the folks that really need the help come and ask for the help, will they be guided? Will they know where to go? You know what I'm saying? So I think that point is an excellent one for the citizens of the countries as well. Thank you, Secretary Gingir. Thank you. And Minister Plumman, if you will maybe just give us a quick synopsis of what the research speaks to you.
Yeah, maybe following up on what my colleague from Kenya said, I think one should never underestimate the power of data. And if you look at people who are left behind, many of them don't even show up in the data. So if you're disabled, in many countries, there's no statistic about you. Yeah. And if there's no statistics, one can pretend that you're not there. So I would just like to underline that point and also say that my country is really willing to engage with other countries to invest in building capacity on data collection and data interpretation. My second point would be following up on what Danny said. I do think that if it's about leaving no one behind, it is a joint responsibility, because it's not only about socio-economic factors, it's also about processes that exclude people from communities. And from a government level, of course, one needs to have laws and one needs to stand up for the morale of the country. But, you know, it's also your neighbors also have to see you. Yes. And for that, you need communities, community organizations, NGOs to work together. It's not, again, not only about socioeconomic factors. It's also about, I mean, one could, in the spirit of Mandela, I mean, we celebrate his birthday today, to really open up for everyone, not be judgmental, and try to really think, if I would be that other person, what would I need from my neighbor?
Yes, yes. Yes, and I have to add to what you just said, Mr. Plumman, Aruba is one of the countries within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and we are very, very blessed to have the Netherlands to guide us on this path of sustainable development goals. So we thank you, and we want to thank all of our speakers for their for sharing with us the commitments. I mean, this is a definite commitment. You have the countries of the Netherlands, of Kenya, you have ODI, and of course we have Danny from Civicus that are joining us right now. But this is a huge commitment that has been made, and that's why we are here this afternoon to talk about the importance of taking early action to leave no one behind. And now what I would like to do is I would like to invite you all to come on over and join Derek over here at the campus, because what we would like to do now is we would like to have you sign by your flag, your country's flag, your commitment to leaving no one behind. Derek has done an artist rendition, and so Minister Plumman, Secretary Gingir, you can come along first. This is, of course, a photo op, and I'm going to get out of the line of the photographers.
Yes, so here I go.
We ask your indulgence as this is done.
Yeah. My colleague.
Over here, sir. Just a quick glance over there. Can we try again with your hand up? Just put it this way. Yeah. I know nothing will be out.
But he did sign. So did I. Thank you. Thank you.
Elizabeth? Danny? Will you meet? Yes.
So then here's a pen. Here's a pen. So.
I tried to stay out of your way. So the question that Danny had, and maybe some of you who are also going to come up shortly and speak, was, you know, he has a more concrete pledge. So his question was, should he write out his pledge? For the purposes of the artist rendering of the commitments that are being made today, we are not asking any of you to actually write your pledges, but we would like to get that information so that we can add that afterwards. So once more, I would like to thank our speakers, Minister Plumman, Elizabeth Stewart, Secretary Gingir, as well as Danny from Civicus. All right, and so now what I would like to do is I'd like to call forward 3 more individuals who are going to share with us. And we have the Minister of Finance and Development Planning for Liberia. I hope is in the room. Boy Makamara. Yes, here you are. You get to choose between a chair or a sofa. We have Mrs. Deidre Kent, Director General Development Policy for Canada. Welcome. And we also have Mr. Simon Gaviria, Director of the Department for National Planning. They wrote it in Spanish. Luckily, it's Departamento Nacional de Planeación de Colombia. ¿Sí? Sí. En Aruba nosotros hablamos 4 diferentes idiomas. Español es uno de los 4. But for today, we will speak in English. And so, I'm so sorry. What I would like to do now is I would like to just give each of you an opportunity. Please keep in mind that we are short of time, and because of the format that we're using, we want it to be engaging and we want it to be different, but we also need for you to be respectful of the time when you have an opportunity to speak. And what I would like for each of you to do is I would like you to speak to us just briefly about commitments that your countries have made or are going to make towards early action to leave no one behind. All right, and I would actually like to start with our minister from Liberia.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to be here this afternoon, and I'll be given the opportunity to share our own thoughts. In the context of leaving no one behind, it is important to state that it must begin first with the leadership. That is the political will. In our own case, Her Excellency, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, she has been at the forefront since the coming into being of the SDGs 2030. And in this case, what she did at the beginning of this year was to officially launch SDGs implementation in Liberia as a way of demonstrating the political will that this is what we have to be doing and let's move. And the next step was that she set up a coordinating structure that must lead on. So the Ministry of Finance plays that leadership role in leading on the coordination domestically. So currently what we are doing is that we are now beginning to carve out the next 5 years development agenda plan for the country. So the timing is of importance. How then do we mainstream the 17 goals of SDGs into our local development agenda? And so this timing is good for us, and it's important to take on board. But during this period, it's important to also state how then do we give voice to those that are marginalized, to those that are considered vulnerable, to those that are considered poor. What then we did is that we needed now to activate a vehicle through which people will come and be part of the discussion that informs the development project. So what that has led us to doing is to set up what we call the Civil Society Organization Government Partnership Dialogue, where the poor will come with their issues. Where are we affected most? What should we consider as we now discuss the new 5-year development plan for the country? So it's important to state that point. Also, in the context of moving along the lines of ensuring gender equality, the government also managed to set up what we call the Ministry of Gender, Social and Children Protection Ministry. It is intended to advocate for women issue, children issue, so as a way of addressing matters related to inequality. Also participation in governance. What role women can play in giving them more role in the governance of the country. So currently there is a bill that has been put within the House of Legislature in a way that says not less than 30%. In a way, women's participation is important at this point in time. In addition to all of what we are doing, what is of importance to the agricultural transformation, the economic growth, is the issue of land rights. That has also come strong, and what do we need to do to begin to address those issues that borders on who owns what who should be given what priority. So in that context, the Land Rights Act is now before the legislature, has been passed by the upper house, and is now going for concurrence to the lower house.
Yes.
So it is just to say along the 17 goals, efforts are being made, especially at the Partnership for the Goal. We intend to have a multi-stakeholder gathering, and that is going to be chaired by the president, which we call the Liberia Development Alliance, that looks at everything, what do we need to do, get the voice of the partners on board, and then how then we move the process.
Excellent, excellent. That is just wonderful to hear. Thank you, Minister Kamara. And now I think I'd like to turn to Mrs. Kent over here, our Director General for Development Policy in the country of Canada. Canada has long, I know, been addressing these specific goals, but maybe you can summarize for us what are some of the early action commitments that Canada has or is making.
Thank you so much, and I think this forum is terrific as a way to learn and hear from others and hear the leadership of countries such as Kenya, Liberia in taking concrete actions in areas such as gender equity. Our Prime Minister, one of his first steps was to have, for the first time in Canada, a cabinet that was equal women as men. So those political signals, as you say, are key. For Canada, we recognize the integrated, comprehensive nature of the SDGs, and that allows us to look both domestically and internationally at how we can take those first steps to leaving no one behind. So we're very much looking through in an integrated manner. Internationally, one of the first steps we've taken is to review how we're doing international assistance. We're undertaking a comprehensive review. Maybe many of you have already been consulted by Canada, in Canada and internationally, on how we can both refocus on the poorest and most vulnerable, including supporting fragile states. And this will inform how our international assistance will help advance the 2030 agenda. But that is then aligned with what we're doing in Canada, looking at where we do have vulnerable populations. As our parliamentary secretary just said in the last high-level panel, looking at our Indigenous populations, particularly women and girls, where we're having nation-to-nation engagement with those populations, how we're looking at climate change and having green economic growth. So these priorities are immediately being implemented in Canada, but also will be informing how we're undertaking our international assistance going forward. So very much listening and learning from all the panelists today, and including civil society. I was taken with the concrete facts that ODI pointed to. Canada is chair, along with Bangladesh, of IADI. We just started that new board, recognize the importance of accessible, accurate data if we're to realize these objectives. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you. It is very exciting, and I thank you for acknowledging that the importance of this type of a setting and this forum, so, because we agree that this is necessary, right? More dialogue is what I believe the minister said, and that's what we're doing right now. So thank you so much for that, Mrs. Kent. And so, Senor Gaviria, maybe if you could just share with us a little bit. We know that there are 17 of the SDGs, but what we're interested in finding out most importantly is the leave no one behind. Those that specifically focus on poverty, on housing, things like that, education. What are some of the things your country's engaged in?
Okay, so Colombia has been very committed to the SDG process. We're the country that proposed them at Rio Plus 20. First country to implement SDGs. And right now we're at a point where we've looked at 169 targets and we did a, let's call it a to-do list. Okay. So of the 169 targets, we have actions on 86% of them. By actions, I mean we either have legislation, regulation, or we have something in the 2017 budget, the investment budget, that is addressing one of those targets, right? So we've come to a point where in 86% of them, we are taking action already in place. Leave no one behind, it's from a policy point of view, it's somewhat of a complex issue in the sense that it can mean everything and nothing at the same time, right? So in order to address this in policy, this is the way we're looking at it. The important thing, especially when you look at statistics over a 15-year period, right, is that you're gonna get success out of inertia, right? So, right? Okay, so if you know, economies grow over a 15-year period, and probably you're gonna have reduced poverty, and you're gonna improve education, and you're gonna do, so the effort here is how to measure your effort, right? So take out the inertial component, right? So we're building baselines, right? Out of the 240 indicators, we're doing well on 130 of them. 72 we have partial information, and 28 we're still working on how we're going to measure the costs. So that's the first component, building baselines. The second component, which is key, especially when you're doing policy and you're doing investment projects, is that always, or in most cases, the most cost beneficial investment is going to come in urban areas. So you have an average perception, right? Whereby when you invest in urban areas, you affect the most amount of people.
Yes.
But the concept of leaving no one behind is when you include you give equality also a territorial point of view, right? That no matter where you are in a territory, right, whether it's urban or rural, right, you have the same amount of rights. So creating information for rurality, right? Because rurality is always hampered when you're looking at investment decisions, right? And the third thing you need to, that we're looking about, leaving no one behind, is that disaggregating the indicators is always tough, right? So for example, when you look at measurements for women's equality, right? Or people that have some kind of incapacity, right? Or some, for example, indigenous people in Colombia that have some indicators. You need to be able, when you come up with your metrics, to make sure that you can disaggregate them from the baselines, to make sure that when you do the investment, regulatory, or legislative decisions, right, you can have a positive action towards these specific groups, right? So it's making sure you don't measure inertia, but your effort. Making sure that equality includes geography and territoriality, especially in rural areas. And the third thing, which is what we want to build over the next few years, is making sure that we have baselines, disaggregating averages for specific groups, but usually you lose them in the average.
Yes, thank you so much. You know, what's been great about everything that we've heard so far, and I think what I want to do is encourage everyone to do what Minister Plowman said, is she said that her country is willing and open to benchmarking, joining with, partnering with any other country that that meets that. And I think after listening to some of what's happening in your countries, I think that's what everybody needs to do. And I hope that everyone who has spoken so far this afternoon is open and willing to sharing and to benchmarking to ensure that we all reach our goals long before 2030. Thank you to all of our speakers this afternoon. Thank you. I would now like to invite you to come on over to the campus and to please sign your commitment to leaving no one behind. Thank you so much. And while that is happening, and again, it's of course a photo opportunity, our photographers like to capture the moments so that we can share that. We will be sharing it, of course, much of this on YouTube, Twitter. And I would like to ask the following individuals to prepare to take the stage. Director, Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and Commissioner for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development for the country of Germany, Dr. Ingolf Dietrich. Welcome, Dr. Dietrich. Welcome. Also, I would like to now call the Multilateral Fora Coordinator for AMEXIT for the country of Mexico, Mr. Noel González Segura. Buenas tardes, bienvenido. Good afternoon. And also representing UNICEF, the Deputy Executive Director for Partnerships, Mr. Justin Forsythe. Welcome. Okay, so Derek, how's it coming? Sound good. What do you guys think? Is it looking good? Now, I know that some of you aren't able to stay the whole time for our entire event, but if you've got to run out, please make sure that you take a photo of our Leave No One Behind commitment tree so that you can share that on Twitter, on Facebook, and just make sure that that message gets out there. Thank you. All right, so I think that what we would like to do is we would like to ask Dr. Dietrich to talk a little bit. Dr. Dietrich, I mean, in addition to being the director for the federal ministry in his country, he's also the commissioner for the 2030 Agenda for for stable development in his country. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what Germany is focusing on as it relates to Leave No One Behind and taking early action.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. I will do that. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the host of this really important initiative. We have the honor and the pleasure to speak today. Well, what is Germany doing? First, I would like to mention that, like as one of our two speakers had said before, that we all have our tasks to do also in our countries. It's not like with the NDGs, which were more or less designed for the South. The SDGs are universal. They are for the whole world, for all countries, and also Germany has to do, I would say, its homework, and its big homework. Germany is a developing country concerning sustainable development, and the latest reports show that. So we are trying to implement the agenda within Germany in the frame of our national strategy on sustainable development. We are adapting this strategy to 17 goals and also from the time frame to 2030. Very important, which was not mentioned up to now today, we think that like Germany, every country has its global responsibility to leave no one behind, and for us, it's a call for putting more effort in reducing inequality. We cannot live in a world where more and more wealth is concentrated in the hands of a small number of people. And for us, achieving goal number 10, reducing inequality within and among countries, is closely linked with leave no one behind. I would be in the position to give some examples, but I can't give them all because we are limited in time. I would like to say that Germany is taking its responsibility seriously, and I would like to express the high political support for Leave No One Behind. In our political priorities in development cooperation, they focus on the target groups of Leave No One Behind. Just a few examples. About a quarter of our budget is focused to fragile states. We are also increasing our portfolio for supporting refugees. One example is that we are pursuing HDR are working together in a project of 50 million euro in East Africa, and this aims to improve water supply, nutrition, and access to education. We also launched a third example, a partnership called Prospects in the Middle East, which will create 50,000 employment opportunities for displaced people and local communities. Until the end of this year, we will invest 200 million euro, and part of this is also a teacher salaries project or support, allowing more than 300,000 additional children to attend school. Very important, the fourth example, you disrupt me when it's getting too much. Since the poorest suffer most from climate change, protecting climate means protecting the poor. Therefore, Germany aims to double its international climate financing by 2020 compared to the 2014 figures. And Germany also was the co-founder of the G7 initiative, Insure Resilience, which aims at increasing the number of people in the most vulnerable developing countries who have access to direct or indirect insurance coverage against the negative impacts of climate change by up to 400 million people by 2020. I skipped two of the points because I would like to mention another one which also was mentioned before, but we think that is very, very important. Identifying those at risks to be left behind, we need research and disaggregated data. And I'm very happy to hear that from speakers, and I also was happy to learn that we co-fund ODI's research in this area. And I had been on a side event some months ago when we talked about that. I think I'll leave it with this. I'm very happy to be with you here, and yes, let's take the energy of today and of our everyday's work to wish us a successful implementation of the initiative.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much. Everything that's being spoken this afternoon is so encouraging, and we really appreciate you being here and making the commitments that you have on behalf of your country. I'd like to now turn it over to Mr. Gonzalez to tell us a little bit about the country of Mexico and what are some of the key highlights that are being done in that country to address Leave No One Behind. And I believe there is a microphone.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, allow me to convey to you the message and the greetings of Ms. Gina Casar, who is the head of the Mexican Agency for International Development Cooperation, and Minister Claudia Ruiz-Massieu, who happens to be the fellow co-chair along with Minister Blumen of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. And well, it is always, of course, an advantage to come to share with you the experiences of Mexico, and then, of course, allow me to also greet the other co-organizers, Mr. Kinjuri and ODI for the invitation to this very relevant event. So as I was saying, I think it is always an advantage to come after such a number and substantive interventions, because I have the advantage to actually come and share with you that what we are doing in Mexico has to do with many of the issues that have been put on the table so far. Of course, we are working in strengthening our national capabilities for measuring and strengthening the follow-up and to establish the baselines that are going to be allowing us to work and to set specific targets for the next 15 years. But besides that, what we are doing in the Mexican Agency for International Development Cooperation to leave no one behind is working on development cooperation, in particular to the kind of cooperation that we call South-South cooperation. We don't have, I'm so sorry to say, as many resources as our German friend here, which I feel very envious about.
We may have to have some side conversations.
Oh yes, we will need to do that. But what we are doing is sharing our own experiences in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals with our friends, in particular from the Latin American region and from other regions as well. We have been working since 2008 or 9 with building a community of experts, a community of practice with other countries in Latin America in order for strengthening their own capabilities for measuring and following up on the statistics for the implementation of the back then the Millennium Development Goals. And now we are moving from that more narrow perspective that we had to a broader perspective to include the MDGs and to really try to build in strengthening our neighbors' capabilities to also be able to advance in the same direction. So through South-South cooperation, through the effective use of international development cooperation as a means of implementation of this very important agenda, what we are trying to do is to share our experiences at the national level in order to really move along with, as a region, as a Latin American region, in particular in the Central American region, towards the implementation of most of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to turn to UNICEF, considered really the champion of SDGs. And with us we have this afternoon Mr. Forsyth, Justin Forsyth. Welcome. What I'd like to ask is, what does the phrase and leave no one behind mean to UNICEF?
I think, as a lot of the speakers have said, this is not just a phrase, it's real for so many people around the world who are being left behind. In our case, and our focus on children. It's that child that doesn't get a chance to go to school, it's that child because of their gender or their identity or because they're disabled doesn't get a chance to fulfill their potential, or it might be that woman in childbirth who has no access to a trained health worker. And the first thing I really wanted to say to add to the conversation here today is that despite the progress we made with the Millennium Development Goals, despite this very good commitment with the Sustainable Development Goals not to leave anyone behind, we shouldn't underestimate the scale of the challenge. Just to give you two statistics that bring this really alive. So in a country like Brazil, which has made extraordinary progress in reducing under 5 child mortality, and so in most of Brazil about 5 per 1,000 children die from preventable diseases like pneumonia, diarrhea and malaria. But in the poorest municipalities, in 32 of them, it goes up to 80. That's a huge disparity. In somewhere like Pakistan, a poor rural girl from a poor family has less than 1 year in school, where if you're from a richer family or an urban boy, you go for an average of 11 years. In Kenya, we heard earlier very eloquently from the minister, if you're a poor woman in a remote area, northern Kenya, you're only going to have a 20% chance of having access to a trained midwife, where over 80% in a richer area. So these are massive disparities in these countries that aren't easily overcomable. And we're not going to overcome them unless we take on some of the more difficult issues at the heart of this, to do with gender, to do with identity, as well as to do with inequality, to do with poverty. So it's not just more of the same that's going to deal with leaving the most left behind children, whether it's fragile states or gender or identity or disability. We need different types of strategies to get to the root causes of these. And we're committed, and this is a commitment I'm making here today on behalf of UNICEF, is we need to put the most left behind first. So when we're developing these national SDG strategies, we have to put the interests of the most left behind at the front of the queue. In our case, we put the children in our programming at the front of the queue. And then we look at the reasons why they're most left behind. And it's different in different countries. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution for these challenges. It will be different in different countries. So that's the first thing I wanted to say today. The second thing is that I think it's only, and we heard this from the earlier speakers, through an unusual coalition of actors are we going to get to these more difficult issues. So for example, one of the areas that we made a lot of progress working with the Bangladeshi government was children in very poor districts out of school with an innovative programme that involved government, the private sector, NGOs. It dealt with cultural as well as policy and resource issues altogether. So the 2 points I really wanted to make is that we're going to have to look differently at solving these challenges and put the most disadvantaged first, and we're going to need unusual coalitions of change really to make a dent if we're going to do, as ODI have argued, to really accelerate this at the front end of the next 15 years, not the back end.
Yes.
Excellent. Well said. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Forsyth. So I want to now thank all three of these gentlemen for joining us this afternoon. And I would also like to invite them over to the canvas so that you can sign your commitment to leaving no one behind. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias. There was someone who was going to get Collins there. There she is. Thank you once again to Dr. Dietrich, to Mr. Gonzalez, and to Mr. Forsyth for your commitment to taking early action and leaving no one behind. And now we are really, really excited for the next guests to come forward. All of our guests this afternoon have done an awesome job, and we are looking forward to the speakers that are to come. But this individual is a man who has advanced the human rights of deaf people and more broadly people with disabilities for over 35 years. His name is Colin Allen, and he's not unknown to many of you, and he is the chair for International Disability Alliance. So ladies and gentlemen, please help us welcome Mr. Colin Allen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honoured to be here with you all, including ministers present. Thank you. In terms of some background information, globally there are 1 billion persons with disabilities, 80% of whom live in developing countries. These people are overrepresented amongst those living in absolute poverty. Particularly, these people are at risk of climate change, natural disasters, and food insecurity. It is important that we must ensure that people with disabilities are not left behind. The Millennium Development Goals did not include people with disabilities. In contrast, persons with disabilities have been included in the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. Specifically with 11 explicit references. But we need to translate these frameworks into action at national levels. And that is yet to come. I'd like to draw your attention to findings of a survey conducted concerning the gaps of national voluntary review consultation processes. IDA conducted these surveys, particularly with those countries who submitted voluntary reports. Specifically, the survey addressed whether disability focal points had been involved and had seen participation of persons with disabilities in that process. We received 16 responses, and positively, I can inform you all that 12 of those 16 countries did hold multi-stakeholder dialogues with civil society, including those with disabilities. So now I'd like to show and share some of those findings from that survey. The most commonly reported issue concerning the participation of persons with disabilities in the consultation process was the lack of inclusive participation and the need for increased dialogue and engagement opportunities for governments with civil society members, particularly those disability organisations. Specifically, providing accessible infrastructure, information being accessible, for example in Braille, and sign language interpreting. Some DPOs, disability people's organisations, also mentioned they were not included in any dialogue, and instead government agencies were conferred with to discuss topics such as this. So it's important that governments be aware that it's important that people with disabilities are representing themselves. Another concern was the lack of information at a national level and how it transcends different levels throughout the community. Sometimes that was an issue of language, it was an issue of lack of information. So it's important that all this information is translated in such a way that people with disabilities in various areas, regardless of their disability or aspect in life, has access to information. Regardless of the geography of where they live, it means having information translated into Braille, in sign language, and easy to read text. Now, we know the complexity of having these global points, these global agreements translated at a regional, national, and local level. But that is what is required. We need this information that we're discussing here to reach the grassroots members of our community, and this will ensure no one will be left behind. I have a pledge that I'd like to announce and share with you all. Annually, the stakeholder group of persons with disabilities will engage, mobilise, and build capacity of the disability movement at a national level, with particular focus on countries giving their voluntary reports at the high-level political forum. And as a result of that work, within 3 years, this stakeholder group of persons with disabilities will produce a comprehensive step-by-step guide for governments on how they can ensure that inclusion and participation with people with disabilities concerning the Sustainable Development Goal implementation is in line with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That is my pledge. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Okay, so I am going to get a little signal here because we may have to do a little switcheroo in the program. So we're going to wait for this one. Okay. All right. Okay. So I've got my marching orders. I would now like to, actually, we would like Mr. Allen to sign his pledge. Yes, you've got to go over and sign your pledge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I go forward, is there anyone in the room from Uganda? Do we have anyone in the room from Uganda? No? Okay. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to call forward the Senior Vice President for the World Bank for the 2030 Development Agenda and UN Relations and Partnerships, Mr. Mahmoud Moildin. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
I would also like to call forward the Head of International Relations for the Department for International Development for the United Kingdom, Mrs. Gwen Hines. And lastly, I would like to call forward the Deputy Permanent Representative for the country of Rwanda, Mrs. Jean Jark Biagi. Welcome to all of you. Okay. All right, since there's room on the sofa, we're going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and call for the Foreign Secretary to the country of Bangladesh, Mr. Shahidul Haq. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we have a full house up here, and I just want to give the rest of the audience a little bit of an idea of what's still left in the program. After these individuals get an opportunity to briefly share with us what commitments their countries or organizations has made towards leaving no one behind, we will have a short presentation or speech by Mrs. Helen Clark, the Administrator, United Nations, and then we will wrap up our program. So if you're here with us still, please just give us another few minutes so that we can wrap things up. We don't want you to miss out on anything. So what I would like to do now is I would actually like to ask Mr. Moildin, the Senior VP for the World Bank, to open up for us. And I'm going to take this microphone and share it with you. So the question that I have for you, sir, is we know that the World Bank is already deeply engaged with the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, and funding is probably one of the biggest challenges for many countries. So the question then is, if funding can inhibit these countries from executing commitments that are being made towards leaving no one behind, what role can the World Bank play in this important initiative? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, I'm happy to switch roles, but this is too difficult.
I'm not
Would you mind having some of that power? Would you mind having some of that power, Mr. Hawk? And is it Hawk or is it Hawk?
Sorry, Hawk.
It's Hawk. Okay, so I said it right. Okay.
Right. Well, it's a very important question, the issues related to funding. But I'm very happy and pleased to have listened to all of the kind of emphasis on data, institutional arrangements, policy frameworks, and the kind of partnerships required for that. Because the issue of resources based on 15 years on trying to implement the MDGs with different countries have been very much a constraint. But we have seen many countries with ample resources but not really able to achieve anything because of bad management, bad governance, and bad targeting. So I think the point I'd like to make, I'll definitely talk very briefly about finance, but it's basically about three things plus one in order to achieve the SDGs. And this is not really a kind of thinking that I've made in my way to the room, but it took us some good time since Rio in the preparation of the SDGs, with the regional development banks, with our board, with our partners in development. What are they? First is data and evidence. I'm very pleased to listen to the emphasis of leaving no one behind. But do we recall that we have 1.5 billion people, roughly speaking, who have no clue about their progress over time, including children, and I think the UNICEF could be, and as they are, more concerned about this than we are at the bank. We have 1.5 billion people without any kind of ID. And the issue here, how to fix it with the advances in technology, is not really very complicated. And in seeking partnership, this would be a very good way of getting things done, especially with the countries with advanced technologies and willingness to make some good offers in that front. The other thing that we won't have a clue about, not just individuals, but 58 countries. We don't really know what they are doing as far as the poverty and the progress in the poverty profile, because they are not collecting household surveys regularly. For more than 12 years, we have no observation for 28 countries, and one single observation for around 27 countries. So here again, we contributed to solving the problem in partnership with different partners. $300 million are required from now until 2020, and we're putting this kind of money up front in order to get some decent data from 78 countries, including enhancing the quality of data from the countries that collect the data now. And now, from our experience in the bank, that again, using technology is enabling us to get better data more frequently and with a fraction of the cost that they used to cost us only 5 years ago. So this is on the data front. The other thing is basic. I'm taking the offer of Her Excellency, the Minister, the Dutch offer, for possibility of partnerships. The European Union has been doing fantastically well in the past as far as the twinning programs are concerned. And we are willing, and we have many good demand by serious countries to apply for twinning programs. In some of them could be facilitators or matchmakers, and in many of them we may just stand behind and be ready to provide the backing, especially for institutional reforms, and it comes to data and for the executing agencies and government departments. Third, on the finance. I will start with climate change finance because it's a very particular commitment and affecting more the vulnerable more than anybody else. The farmers, those who are in coastal areas, small islands, and we made a commitment that from now until 2020, we're going to be enhancing the share of climate-related finance from 21% to 28%. And this is going to be including enhancing the capacity for early warning system, adaptive social protection mechanisms, and this is on the financing side. In addition to that, we have funding jointly with the MDBs of $400 billion from now until 2020. And that is an old commitment, not that old, it's a 1-year-old commitment. We made it in Addis for the implementation of the SDGs. So I mentioned data, I mentioned implementation on finance. What is the fourth aspect? I'm trying to build the base of the pyramid here. So those three aspects, finance, data, and implementation, have been in agreement for almost 2 years now. And we made that commitment to the Secretary General and to the UN system and to our clients. But the fourth one is about reporting. Of course, at this stage, we have very little to report on, and we're happy with the leadership of ECOSOC and to get us into HLPF. But April 2017, we're going to be producing the first new report on the monitoring of the SDGs. And with our knowledge of doing that report for more than 12 years on the MDGs, we're going to be reporting on the specific cases, country by country, case by case, and now I'm tinkering with the idea whether just to report or to rate or to rank countries. But this is going to be a very interesting aspect of the work.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Royalty. I think you should applaud. I heard not thousands, I didn't hear millions, I heard billions that is going to be invested in the long term. So we thank you. We thank the World Bank.
Thank you.
And I'm going to scoot on over to my friend from Bangladesh over here, who I was trying to give the responsibility of all these billions. Foreign Secretary Haq, can you maybe just tell us what is the primary goal for, well, the primary goal for this event is to get commitments from countries, right, on early action to leaving no one behind. So what are some high-level commitments that the country of Bangladesh has made towards that front?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. As you know, that Bangladesh has achieved most of the MDGs quite ahead of time. So what we are currently doing is to building on whatever achievements that we have made over the years, especially in the area of women's empowerment and gender equality. So, in fact, right on the day when last year the Agenda 2030 was adopted, our Prime Minister made a strong commitment that Bangladesh will continue to lead in terms of achieving some of the goals that has been set on that day. And she has attached topmost priority to women's empowerment. That's the commitment she has made. And there are three components into that particular commitment. First is that she wants to positively discriminate in terms of bringing women into not only in the economic sector but also in the policy and politics. And that's one commitment of Bangladesh. The other one is that linking the remote areas through connectivity, basically through digital devices, taking the advantage of technology. So that's the other commitment that we have made. But now it seems that much more importance is to continue to make our youth remain committed to developing the country rather than taking extremist path. So that has become topmost priority of our country. As you know, that there was a couple of sad incidents that took place. So the focus is currently there, and that's why we are currently thinking that had we been sitting today and debating on or designing the Agenda 2030, would we not be taking the whole issue of anti-terrorism and extremism much more seriously and possibly as a goal? I think when we go into the implementation of this, I think stability of the country, not only economically but also in terms of security and politics, is extremely crucial. We cannot do anything unless the country is stable in every sense of the word. So keeping stability is, I think, one of the most important commitments that we all need to make now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Secretary Hogg. Your young people and stability. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to, and I know that you've got to run out, and so I'd like to actually invite you over to the canvas, and you can stand next to the man with the money, but he signs too.
With the World Bank?
Oh, yeah. It is safe. It is extremely safe. I'm just the moderator. I can say anything. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. See you in Dhaka. Come on.
I'd actually like to also ask I would like to ask Administrator for the United Nations Development Program, Mrs. Helen Clark, to come forward, and you can tell me if when you speak, if you'll be more comfortable at the lectern and we do have Mrs. Gwen Hines, and we also have Mrs. Jean Biagé, and we've asked them the possibility to allow you to speak, and I do know that their time is also very valuable, and they've also got commitments, but we will allow you a couple of minutes because this is extremely important that you address this group of people today. There you go.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess we're all on the run in a week like this, but firstly, I very much like the focus on the first 1,000 days. I think it's very concrete. It's also a realistic time frame in which to get some things going and start to see some results. And I think the scope and the scale of the kinds of commitments being made here today suggests we can really make some progress. As the ODI report points out, we haven't got a hope of achieving the SDGs if the poorest people and the most marginalised are left behind in the way they have been. We've come through 15 years of MDGs, we still see 900 million people living in extreme poverty and all the other challenges that we know. So the sooner we act to reach the last mile, the more likely we are to reach the SDGs. Now, UNDP and our associated program, UNCDF, have just completed a new report on getting to the last mile, and we identified 3 top priorities in addressing inequalities and exclusion. First, identify what's actually driving those inequalities. Very, very important to be precise about what we're trying to tackle here. Second, also understand the reasons why people are falling back into poverty, as so often happens. This is very much an issue in a number of the middle-income countries. Make so much progress, and then a big shock comes along, and people are back under that line again. So, how to build resilience to those shocks, which do take people back into poverty, will be important. And then, thirdly, we're identifying how critical it is to work across the different silos of the humanitarian, the development, the human rights, the peace building. Working in silos just doesn't get the best results for people. And for that reason, we have the joined up approach from the UN Development Group to the SDGs. And I was really very heartened of the World Humanitarian Summit to see this very much as a thrust as well. We have to work better together across the traditional silos. So for UNDP, I think 3 specific commitments we'd like to make today. Firstly, we will invest in gathering the data and the evidence which will enable better identification of people and groups who are left behind and improve the support we can give to countries to draw up and implement the policies which will ensure inclusion and reaching that last mile. Secondly, ensure that our programming principles explicitly include attention to leaving no one behind. We have a good record of rigorous social and environmental standards in our work, and we can definitely improve our focus on targeting the excluded and the marginalised. And thirdly, and very importantly, we need to expand our investments in the prevention and preparedness work we do in the fragile and conflict-affected settings, where, after all, around half of the world's extremely poor people live. And this will be very much around better linking the work we do with our humanitarian, human rights and peace-building partners. So, those are my brief comments. I know many people have made lots of very succinct brief comments. I think, am I going to go over there and put a little signature underneath this talented artist's calligraphy? But thank you again to all the organisers and for ODI for the very timely report on the 1,000 Days Focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to Administrator Clark, and also I want to thank Mrs. Hines and Mrs. Biagé for their patience. I would now like to ask Mrs. Hines, and you can tell me if you want to sit. You're comfortable sitting. There's a microphone right here. But I just have a quick question for you. Basically, what's your view? What is your view on Leave No One Behind? What commitment is the DFID making towards early action to LNOB?
Thank you very much, and I know we've had a long session, but it's also really encouraging and really interesting to see the different issues people bring out. And I'll try not to repeat messages people have already said, but I endorse what others have said about the importance of this issue, and the issues there very cleverly drawn up for us. So I'm representing the British government, and we're obviously looking at this both as a domestic issue, what we do in the UK, but also what we do internationally. So my job is to work on the international side, international development. And let me say we're doing a huge amount on this. We were doing it, obviously, in the past. We pushed very, very hard for this as a key principle in the SDGs, and I'm delighted it's there. Why are we pushing it? Why do we think it's so important? Because as others have said, we made huge progress on the Millennium Development Goals, but that was only about halving. That was shifting the needle. That's great. But if you're in the other half, who aren't lifted out of poverty, who don't get access to education, it's no good to you. And we need to finish the job the MDG started. What the SDGs also do is they add new issues, like disability.
Yes.
It's really important. Governance and security. As Secretary Hack said, if we don't have governance and stability, countries fall back into crisis.
Yes.
We know back in 1990, Voices of the Poor, we asked poor people, what do you want more than anything? Security, stability.
Yeah.
So we added to the MDGs, but we need to finish the job. In terms of what we're doing as the UK, this is very much part of the UK aid strategy. Poverty, vulnerability is there. We've also committed as the British government to invest at least half of our global aid in fragile, conflict-affected states and regions, for the reasons people have given. And we did that knowing it's much more expensive. But it's the right thing to do, because even now, that is, as Helen Clark said, about half the poor people. If you project out to 2030, that is where the bulk of the poor are going to be. Whether it's fragile states in poor countries, fragile parts of middle-income countries, that is the big challenge.
Yes.
And that's the one where we as the international system are just not good enough at the moment. We know that. We know as DFID trying to put staff into fragile conflict states, it's really difficult. People have families, have lives. We know how hard it is to get systems moving. We know often it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps back. You know, the Middle East has become a real challenge to all of us. But it is the right thing to do. If we don't get that right, we've got a problem. So as DFID, we've been developing a new approach and thinking about how we tackle this, building on what other people are doing and thinking how to address it. And we all like 3, so here's the 3 we came up with. First is to understand. As others have said, as Mahmoud has said, the data is really, really critical. And we've been delighted to work with ODI to fund the report to get this moving. And that's a great example of how we get the evidence out there. And I like the focus on the first 1,000 days. I also like it because it fits with the other push on the first 1,000 days in the child's life, from conception, first couple of years. So we know front-loading interventions is what's most impactful down the line. We're also working in cases like Rwanda, birth registration. As Mahmoud said, there's a whole bunch of people who aren't registered, particularly women, particularly minorities. We have to get that right. I'm also really interested across the system and challenge from Mahmoud to others here in the room. How do we share data better? We all write reports, it's great, I've got tons on my shelf. How do we stop writing reports, start using reports, and start sharing that data better?
Yes.
And how do we make sure we do it, not just in the really interesting places, but in the places where there isn't data? I mean, I spent a few years overseas, you know, in outer villages in Malawi. There may be no electricity, there may be no computers, but every health clinic I went to had a bit of paper, births, deaths, marriages, kids in school. The data's there. The question is, how do we get it? How do we use it? So understand is the first one. And we're supporting the UN to do that. Second is empower. We have programs all over the world. Everything DFID does has to tackle gender. It's in legislation. There's no discussion about that. So we have programs all over the world empowering women and children. I'm deputy to Justine Greening on the high-level panel on women's economic empowerment, and we're really pushing that as an example where we can fast-track the SDGs, so show that something can be done. One of the other examples we've committed recently is around Build the Education Challenge Fund. It's a long-running programme, several hundred million, but we've put in another 100 million over the next 3 years, £100 million. And that's to reach 175,000 of the girls most at risk of being left behind. And that is, as I say, knowing that's much more expensive. Yeah. That number goes up every time we try and reach that last mile, but it's really the important thing to do. And we're focusing particularly on the early adolescence transition, because we know that's what matters. So understand, empower. The last one is inclusion. And Colin explained why disability matters in my statement earlier on in the HLPF forum. I talked about disability and what we're doing, and that is really, really important. And we're very happy to share more about what we're doing on that. The last thing I want to say is partnership. The SDG agreements talked about partnership. And as I said, on things like data, we need to come together. We've just done some work looking at the international system. The challenge for the SDGs is not how good an individual agency is, not how good our individual efforts are. And that's really important. What we do in any country, what we do in the UK, what we do as DFID. The key challenge will be how well we can work together. And so it's nice when you come to a forum like this, there's lots of different people. DFID's really happy to supporting the partnership led by civil society, Danny and others working on this. That's more of what we want to do in the future. And that will be the thing we really need to get better at. And since we're sitting in the UN, as we head into the autumn, QCPR, UN reform, that's the big challenge. Get the system working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Hines. So understand, empower, inclusion, and partnerships, right? And that's hopefully what Derek's got up there. And we would like to invite you, because I know that you do have another engagement, but we would like to invite you to please sign your commitment on our commitment tree canvas, and we want to thank you for being here. And I'd also, while the Deputy Permanent Representative for Rwanda prepares to speak, I'd like to call the Director of Central Planning, Monitoring, and Evaluation for Sierra Leone forward. Yes, Mr. Bangura, Sheka Bangura. Okay, and so now, how do I pronounce your name properly? Your last name? Yash. Okay. So, Mrs. Yash, I've read that Rwanda is one of the first countries to embed the SDGs in your national planning. So what are the priorities that your country has outlined to take early action on leaving no one behind?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'd like to thank the Netherlands and Kenya for including Rwanda in this, and also Norway. Unfortunately, she's no longer here because she played a big role with my president as the co-chair of the MDG agenda. And that is where I'm going to draw from, because we know what was successful in and the setbacks we had when we were implementing the MDG agenda. So what was made us successful to meet all our targets and to even exceed some of them was to put an accent, very strong focus on national leadership and national ownership. And I'm going to draw from that in order to tell you that in my pledge we are going to focus. It's not a new commitment. We're going to continue focusing on our main asset, which are our people. Giving them really the opportunity to be in the driving seat, to own the development from the grassroots. So in order to do that, we have to build commitments. We have to build strong institutions first, to give them the possibility to have the capacity to drive the development, to be able to monitor and review their progress, to be able to even question their leaders when they don't deliver on their promises. So that is very important for us. But in order to include everyone, we are talking about people participation. We need also to have strong institutions, accountable institution, responsive institution to the people. Otherwise, you are not going to address all issues of inequalities. You are not going to solve all the problems of the citizens. And my third point will be also, if we're aiming at inclusion, I'm going to join our Minister Fumen when she mentioned data collection. Data is very, very important. Everyone needs to be accounted for. Everyone needs to be counted. And we need to know who is in vulnerable situations like children, women, or in our case, people, genocide survivors who are still suffering the effect of the genocide. And also the elderly, so because they are aging, or these people who lost all their loved ones, it is really very important for us to put some programs that are there for social protection to help those people. And finally, we cannot do that alone. We have also to have collaborations with all actors, such as the civil society and the private sector. We do it actually. We were lucky to pilot the SDG 16, building peaceful societies, because of our the focus we put on governance issues, zero tolerance with corruption. And in the data collection, what I wanted to mention is that we collaborate with all those civil society organizations. We don't draw from our data only, we use also their data, like Transparency International gives us data on corruption, and we use it in measuring issues of governance. That is how we were selected actually because we're already ahead of, even if it was not provided for in the MDG agenda, we were already measuring governance issues in Rwanda. And finally, also I'm going to join what others say, we need also the multi-stakeholders partnership for means of implementation in order to be able to really help our people, because they are the main people that we target mainly.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So Rwanda is represented, and our final speaker for this afternoon, before we share closing remarks, hails from the country of Sierra Leone, and Mr. Bangura, you specifically asked to be given this opportunity, right? Because and Sierra Leone is one of those countries that where there is a big need. So tell us, as it relates to Leave No One Behind, what are some of the commitments that you would like us to know your country has made? And if you can make it brief and specific.
Thank you so much. You made a point. We are a fragile state. Those of you that have been following developments in Sierra Leone over the last 30 years or so, coming from a war, trying to put that war behind us, the effect of the sudden Ebola coming in, to kill many people, so on and so forth. So for us, the Leaving No One Behind is a special provision for countries like us, in the SDGs. So we cannot really waste any time. That's why we are among the 22 countries that are being reviewed at this HLPF. About Leaving No One Behind proper in the context of Sierra Leone, what we actually did, right there in the last couple of months, was to bring down the debates at the national level as to what it actually means when you say Leaving No One Behind and how to get there. The gentleman from Colombia made a point here. If you don't be careful, Leaving No One Behind could mean everything, but nothing. So therefore, we really need to take the debate outside there, to get people's perspective. And that's what we did. We generated a number of messages. Most of the things that have been said here in terms of what do we need to do in that context actually applies for Sierra Leone. People talk about data issue, data distribution, issue of inclusiveness in politics, participation, in them disabilities. But one important thing that came out, during our own assessment, the issue of the welfare of the incarcerated. In Sierra Leone, you have people on remand without indictment for weeks, months, years. What about their welfare? So on and so forth. Then perhaps I did not hear people mention the need to balance the three dimensions of sustainable development. This one is very important in the case of Sierra Leone. We see that as an extension of the Leaving No One Behind, the social, economic, and environmental. But in fact, from our perspective, we add another dimension there, that is political governance dimension to make that. So it's very important To wrap up, you know, in the case of Sierra Leone, the SDGs are not really a nation of the wheel, actually. You know, to us, we think that what is needed to be done most is really to improve on the implementation of programs. You know, you might even argue that we have started implementing the SDGs before, even at the international level. I mean, these things have been started way down there. What we need is probably what I could have as, you know, committed commitments at international level, regional level, that you know, as civil society, a member once said, we also need what to refer to as a coordinated coordination process. So basically, I mean, there's no time, but Sierra Leone cannot actually afford to miss out on this. That's why we will take no time to be part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. But I think none of our countries have any time to miss out, right? And that's why we're here. That's why we took this time. That's why the side event was organized by the Netherlands, by Kenya, as well as ODI, who partnered to ensure that this message gets out. We need to take early action. We don't want to leave anyone behind. And in order for us to reach the SDG goals and deliver on that 2030 agenda, then action needs to start now. And it sounds like from all of our speakers this afternoon, and we want to thank the two of you, also Mrs. Biage and Mr. Bangura, but on all the actions that have been mentioned, all the commitments that have been made. As you can see from the canvas, we have a beautiful Leave No One Behind commitment tree that we are going to be able to leave behind right here at the UN for the next couple of weeks. And please feel free, if there are specific commitments that you would like to send to our Dutch mission so that we can have that included, please do so. But we want to thank everyone for their participation this afternoon. We want to thank all of the countries that have made the time to be here and to speak. We want to thank every one of you for sitting through the session. And Derek, you did a fabulous job. We look forward to inviting you again to